You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London with me, Juliet Spare. Greater Manchester Police, a force in the northwest of England, has become the first force in the country to officially recognise and record attacks on goths and people from subcultures as hate crimes. The move comes after a young woman called Sophie Lancaster was beaten and later died in 2007 because she was dressed as a goth. Ever since Sophie's death, her mother Sylvia has been campaigning for attacks on people who follow alternative cultures and choose to dress like goths to be officially recognised as hate crimes. Sylvia Lancaster is with me in the studio. We're also joined by Robb, music journalist and editor of louderthanwar.com, Simon Price, music critic from The Independent on Sunday, John Garland, reader in Criminology at the University of Surrey, and taking part over the telephone is Una Morris, project manager at charity Stop Hate UK. Reading around victims of hate crime, and to really know why they're a hate crime, you have to ask the victim. Now, you never got to ask Sophie why she was the victim, but you've been campaigning in Sophie's name to protect people who chose to dress differently.
Yeah, and I think what people don't understand is actually, I'd worked in local high schools prior to Sophie's death, and had become quite au fait actually with young people who belong to alternative subcultures being bullied in schools, either by their peers or by teachers. And I would also get phone calls on a Monday morning from parents who would say to me, John's been attacked over the weekend, etc. So it was in my head to do something about it before Sophie was attacked. And I'd actually spoken to Sophie on the Thursday night and said to her, I need to speak to you. Obviously, it wouldn't have taken the same path, but I was actually going to do something prior to that.
What did you want to speak to Sophie about?
Well, I wanted to talk to her and ask her if she would come into local youth clubs with me, because it became very apparent, when you're in schools talking to young people, the other section of young people in schools would often use the term, you dirty mosher, when talking to alternative young people. And that used to really frustrate me, I've got two young alternatives at home, and I wanted to get that message out there that actually, underneath this, they're the same as you or I. That difference is not as big as people imagine. And that's what I wanted to do, really, with Sophie's help. And then she was attacked on the Friday night.
Can you describe how that changed your life on that Friday?
It's like you step out of your old life, that ceases, and you step into another one. And everything that you've believed in, for 20-odd years, it just goes. And it's very difficult. You've got to work your way back to try and make some sense of things. You'll never understand, but it's about trying to get yourself back, I think. It just changes on a stroke, really. And it's an odd thing because it's not something that you would ever choose to happen. You wouldn't choose your life to change like that, but you've just got to deal with it, really.
Sophie was attacked as she walked through a park with her boyfriend on the way home on a Friday night for no reason, just because of the way she was dressed. And this is from your work before, and the work you've done since Sophie's death is all about preventing hate crime.
Yes, definitely. I mean, throughout the attack, the phrase mosher actually was used. Let's get the moshers, let's bang the moshers. And it becomes very apparent that that's what they've been attacked for, and that can't be right.
So what was your response to Greater Manchester Police? Is it not too soon? Is it a bit late, or is it a move in the right direction and now other forces will follow?
I think, in fairness, Greater Manchester Police have taken on board. You know, we've been working with them actually for months, probably about 12 months. They've taken on board the things that we've said. They've seen the impact of the work that we've done in many schools in Manchester. And then have decided to go with, you know, the hate crime. And at the end of the day, we've had a massive job, you know, raising people's awareness of the levels of violence that alternatives face. It's taken us 5.5 years. Who knows what will happen in the next 5.5 years?
You're nodding in a lot of agreement, John, Robb, here, and maybe we'll sort of talk about the phrase or being called or subjected to dirty mosher, which you talked about when Sophie was attacked, and that being relevant to it now being put into a bracket as a specific hate crime. Can you just tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, well, I'm nearly 52 now, so I grew up in the punk era. So I was like in the punk scene in Blackpool. So you can imagine what that was like. There's like people in every small town in England, they're pretty drunk. And it's a pretty rough place to grow up in. So all the people that came from where Sylvia lives, they'd be going crazy in Blackpool. So we took a lot of beatings there, but it made us stronger. It made us want to do it even more. I think it's interesting about people into alternative subculture. You don't actually think I'm in an alternative subculture. It's just something you like, and you only judge yourself by the mirror. You're not dressing up in a certain way to antagonise people. I know people say that, but it's not true. It's just a slight different way of wearing your pullover, isn't it? It just seems crazy. You can die for it. And one thing I want to say about Great Manchester Police is, now I live in Manchester, I'm quite proud of my city, that the police actually recognise this first in my city, you know. And I think in my days in the 70s, the cops would be the last people you'd ever go to if you got attacked in the streets, because they'd probably attack you as well. But we got picked up by the cops so many times in those days. But what you find now is that a lot of the cops are people who used to be in alternative subcultures. A lot of old punks become cops. And they're quite different now. They're not the kind of racist, right-wing scum they were in the 70s. They're actually quite liberal, cool people these days. So it's very, not all of them, but there's a big chunk who kind of understand now, as you find out from working with them. It's changed a lot from the old days, hasn't it?
Yeah, it does, definitely.
Obviously, I can feel in the room the camaraderie. You all know each other because this has been a long battle. This has been, you know, since Sophie's death, and raising the profile as musicians, music journalists. Simon Price, I'll come to you next as well. What was your response to hearing the death of Sophie?
Initially, anger. And you kind of think, if only I was there, I could have just chased those kids off, you know, because I'm quite big, you know. So there's a lot of us are big. We're not all like victims, you know, but a lot of us can actually stand our ground. But that was a very kind of dumb male kind of reaction to it. Then I just wanted to help, so we got in touch, and we found you on MySpace, actually, I think. Yes, I mean, MySpace instead, we got a band, we do gigs, we're not the biggest band in the world, but if there's anything you need, anything you want, just come and find us, speak to us, and because we've got a lot of media stuff, I can connect with a lot of people, and that was my initial reaction. So, and when you say that we all know each other in this room, a lot of the people in the alternative subculture do tend to know each other as well. I mean, all the old punks know each other, even if it's only like at head nodding terms. And we always look at the little kids, the 16, 15, 14-year-olds, as our little brethren, the little cousins, and we like to look after them as well, whether they're goth, punks, any kind of scene. And I would say even the kids on the other side of the equation as well, the ones who everybody will have a bad word for, but they kind of like the kind of scary kids, you know, as well. You know, a lot of them who are into music are kind of on our side. And what I liked about your campaign was you were trying to embrace what would be perceived initially as the enemy. You know, the thing was, it was against all hate crimes. It wasn't meant to be everybody hating those kids as well. No. It's apart from the specific ones in that instance, but their friends, the ones who wear the kind of sportswear stuff, they weren't the enemy, and that's what I thought was powerful about the message.
Simon, how did you get involved with the foundation, or do you want to tell us about your experiences? I'm
an ex-goth, or recovering goth, I sometimes say. And when I was younger, I went through all kinds of different youth tribes. And in the 80s, particularly, it was a very tribal time. You know, if you were, you could be a punk or a mod or a skinhead, a teddy boy, metaler, goth, whatever it may be. And when I heard about what happened to Sophie, I've got to say it was a wake-up call. It was a bit of it seemed like a bit of a throwback to an earlier time. You sort of thought that this sort of thing doesn't happen anymore. You know, maybe I've become complacent through living in London for so long and in this kind of cocoon, this bubble of very kind of liberal, tolerant, arty people that, you know, maybe in other parts of the country this sort of thing still does go on. And I do think that even though thankfully incidents as extreme as what happened to Sophie are very rare, I think low-level kind of aggression, violence, verbal and physical abuse goes on every weekend in small towns all over the country. And most of it goes unreported because I think people think that if they do report it, it won't be taken seriously. Well, now, thankfully, someone is taking it seriously.
We should introduce Una into the discussion. Hi, Una.
Hi.
You've obviously worked with the foundation. Could you define hate crime for us?
Well, a hate crime is any crime that's motivated by prejudice or hostility towards someone because of who they are.
How much of an important step is it that Greater Manchester Police have made? Obviously, John said how proud he is that he lives in a city where a force has done this.
Yeah, it's a very important step, and I think we're already seeing other police forces think about taking this on board as well. For example, there was an article yesterday that said Sussex police are considering doing the same thing. So in that sense, it's a really positive step, not just for people from alternative subcultures, but also for society.
Can you just tell us, as a charity, what you hear on a daily basis?
Well, we've already heard the term lower-level incidents, and that's typically the sort of incident that people report to us. We do hear about kind of the more serious violent attacks, but it's mostly the lower-level incidents. And the reason that they're reported to us is because people don't want to bother the police with that sort of incident, or they don't have time to go to the police with that sort of incident, or they want to ask us first, is this something that the police will take seriously? And with this step being taken by Greater Manchester Police, we can say to people now, this is something that the police are interested in. If you've been targeted because you're from an alternative subculture, this is now being recognised as a hate crime.
Thanks, Una. OK, John, I'm going to come to you. You're a reader in criminology. What's your current research?
Myself and my colleague Paul Hodkinson are actually looking at the victimisation of goths and others from alternative subcultures as well. So we're tying that in with the whole hate crime idea, really, and trying to work out, well, what are people actually going through out there? How prevalent is this? What's its nature and what's its impact as well?
Simon, you mentioned earlier about your experience in Brighton. Can you share that with us?
Yeah, I live in Brighton, which is a very kind of tolerant, liberal, laid-back, bohemian sort of town. It's the gay capital of the UK and all that sort of thing. But even there, you do get aggression and abuse for the way you look. I was once in the main kind of goth pub in Brighton, and we literally had to barricade ourselves in because the pub was under attack from a gang who wanted to smash their way in and start a fight. And only the other week I was walking down the street and some lunatic in a tracksuit armed with a Staffordshire Bull Terrier came at me for the way I look. He wanted to have a fight. He'd follow me all the way down the street shouting and trying to provoke me into a fight. And maybe I should have reported that, but all I wanted to do was just get home and forget about it.
Do you think then that because of Greater Manchester Police's move and Sussex Police's move, that actually if that happened, you could report that? And then, John, would we have a more accurate picture of how people are being targeted? And surely that is one of the gains?
Yes, I think it is. If we can encourage people to go to the police, I think that's the important thing. I think my research has suggested that, mainly people don't go to the police. Not even sometimes for when they've been attacked. They just don't really bother. Partly because they think, well, they'll deal with it themselves, or they don't want to bother the police, or they think the police won't take it seriously. So I think it sends out a very important message that the police are taking it seriously at last. I
think it's a really important point that people feel they can go to the police, whereas in my day, you wouldn't go to the police because they felt like the enemy then. But whereas now, you can go to police and theoretically, because of what this campaign's done, you can feel like they would actually look after you and get it reported. I mean, personally speaking, I don't mind banter. I don't mind people sort of laughing at the way you look. I'm cool with that. If you say, how low level does it go to? I think banter's fair enough. If you can just get it all out with banter, because there's always going to be fear and prejudice and all the reasons why people do this kind of thing. But if you can take it out just by laughing at each other, that's okay. But when it comes violence to what happened to Simon, the guy from down the street with the pit bull, to me, that's stepping over the mark,
So in hindsight, I guess you wish you'd probably reported it.
I don't know about that. Like I say, I was just glad to get home in one piece, to be honest. But I think the thing with goths is a lot of them tend, and also emo kids, a lot of them tend to be the more kind of quiet, withdrawn, sensitive, shy kids who are almost an easy target by definition. And apart from maybe a Saturday afternoon when they hang around shopping malls, they tend not to gather in great numbers. So they can't really fight back. And why should they have to physically fight back? It's a shame if people feel they have to somehow, become vigilantes to defend themselves. That, it shouldn't have to come to that.
But you don't need to be vigilante, because the police technically, maybe theoretically, are your vigilante for you, as maybe in Manchester but nowhere else. And I like to pick up that thing about it just being in small towns. I think it goes on as big cities as much as small towns, because I don't like this idea that people in small towns are all just a bunch of idiots who attack anybody who looks weird. It can go on right in the middle of London on a night bus. It's not specifically just daft people in the north or whatever people like to always perceive it as. It's a national or an international thing as well. I'm sure as people listen to this in big cities in Russia have the same problem, or around
Mexico,
the world.
The thing that happened in Mexico with all the the battles, the wars against emo kids in there, and in Iran, emo kids being stoned to death and so on. So and you can't always rely on the authorities to be on your side. I mean, as John has said, things have changed a lot, but for example, I lived in Paris about 20 years ago, and Jacques Chirac, who was the mayor of Paris at the time, had actually ordered a crackdown on punks, goths, alternative types, because he thought that we were scaring away the tourists. Of course, it didn't occur to him that maybe we were the tourists. But I would be targeted on a regular basis, have gendarmes literally holding me at gunpoint, making me empty my bag onto the street, which is, just intended to humiliate me, really.
That happened to be in Paris.
With all the French then.
Yeah.
Going to move to you, John. I was going to ask you why specifically you focus on goths in your research, but go with what you were going to say first.
Okay, well, there's a couple of things I think that both John and Simon said that really resonate, that this can happen anywhere. I've come across a couple of cases recently in my own research. One involving a young male who's been repeatedly attacked in Essex, repeatedly beaten, including hospitalised, just because of how he looks. And then another case I came across of a goth in her mid-50s in Chester, supposedly posh Chester, and she's been spat at, had coins thrown at her and things like that. So I really think it can happen anywhere.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London with me, Juliet Spare. We're talking about a recent decision by Greater Manchester Police to officially recognise attacks on goths and punks as hate crimes. Una Morris is from Stop Hate UK.
I think it's important to recognise that some people are targeted on such a regular basis that it just becomes a normal, everyday part of their life. And what we're trying to do is to try and change that way of thinking and to tell people that they don't have to put up with it, and there are organisations out there that can support you. So there are some people who would never report an incident to the police, and that's where it's important for third-party reporting organisations like Stop Hate UK to be able to offer that support and an alternative way of reporting to someone who's independent.
Sylvia, you've been, since this announcement by Greater Manchester Police, you've tirelessly given interviews. People are really interested. And I know you've been campaigning a long time. Why do you think it got the reaction that it did?
I think it got that reaction, and I'm laughing because I didn't expect it. I suppose when it's your life and you're really quite focused, you don't think really in the wider society. And I was quite shocked really that I was branded a loony lefty. Because that's just the way that I am, and that's where my head's at, So
proud of.
I was a bit shocked. So what? I just thought I were okay.
A lot of this will come out in the media with papers like the Daily Mail. Every time there's little things like every time there's like some kid goes on a rampage in America with a gun, he's always called a goth killer. And that last one he did it wasn't even a goth killer at all. He wasn't a goth, he was a killer. The one who shot all the kids in the school. But he was nothing like a goth. And it's like, so when they use that word, and it's always used in a negative kind of way, like the baddies in TV programmes or the weirdos or whatever. So then it becomes easy to pick on those kind of people. A lot of it comes to the mainstream media, and a lot of that actually comes to the Daily Mail and for people like Little John. So I like to report him right now.
Do you think also that people don't understand, people who aren't or don't belong to a subculture don't understand, and actually perhaps by your campaign being thrust in the media spotlight, everyone is suddenly, wow, look at these people, they look really different, and let's find out a bit more in a positive way?
Yeah, because what we're finding is, when we're going to schools, which is, we knew, that there was an issue, but actually it's far deeper than we actually thought. And what we're finding is that young people in schools don't talk about racism, they don't talk about homophobia or disability issues, but what they do is talk about alternatives, and actually some of the things that they come out with is really quite scary. It's quite scary, it's quite shocking, and actually it's nasty. And so what we're doing is obviously trying to get into as many schools as we can and challenging those stereotypes and saying, you know, there's no need to be frightened of difference, because that's what seems to be happening.
I think it's important
Simon.
to make a distinction between fantasy and reality, because goths tend to be interested in things like horror and death and gore and violence and all that kind of stuff on a cultural level. You know, they like the films and video games and all that sort of stuff, and they can look quite extreme with piercings and tattoos and all the makeup and bondage and fetish wear and that kind of thing. But in reality, they are usually the most peaceful people you could ever meet. So people from outside that culture shouldn't be, you know, scared of them or see them as alien or some kind of other thing, even if possibly the intention for teenage dressing that way is to alienate themselves and is to separate themselves from the mainstream. Underneath it, they are, you know, probably the most placid, nice, tranquil people you could meet.
Is there an element then of some sort of irony that because goths by nature are withdrawn and not necessarily anti-establishment, but withdrawn away from the establishment, and now they are being offered protection by Greater Manchester Police, and we hear maybe Sussex Police?
Well, goths pay the council tax, same as anyone else.
It's interesting you mention that, because on my website we did a piece about this, and there was some people who would think this is a really great idea, but they're actually quite angry about it in a way, saying why should we be working with the police, because they still perceive the police as being the enemy, whatever. But I think if you've got the luxury of living in a nicer town where this thing doesn't go on so much, then maybe it's easy to say that. But if you're living on the front line of that problem, you need some help, don't you? Because you can't rely on your little 14-year-old mate to stand up against these people. So you don't want it to escalate into a police affair, but sometimes you need the big guys to come and help you out, and it's different if you haven't got the luxury of living in a kind of nicer environment.
And I guess that's what you've been fighting for, isn't it?
And I think the thing is as well, you've got to be, unfortunately, on the inside to be able to make that change. And we've been really embraced, I've got to be honest, by the different police forces. And I think the reasoning why, I hold my hands up, when we go in to talk about hate crime, we're seen actually as quite a funky charity. You know, we are. And we get that message across to young people because they respond to us. Because we use music, we try to be more creative. And it doesn't matter whether we're talking about alternative hate crime, we're talking about hate crime per se, really. And that's, I think, part of the reason why the police have embraced us.
Can I ask, John, why you specifically chose goths? Are there other parts of this subculture that people, or other tribal elements to a subculture, or why just goths for you?
Well, I had a history of looking at hate crime more broadly, and I've looked at all different types of hate crime. And when I was researching a book on it, was when I came across Sophie's case, and that just, I don't know, really hit home for some reason. It's such a moving and affecting case, and I thought, well, I began to change my thinking really about hate crime as an issue, and think, well, why isn't this recognised by the police, by the criminal justice system? It seems to me to bear all the hallmarks of what is a hate crime. If somebody's attacked because of who they are and the impact that it has upon them. So it's for that really. I suddenly thought, well, this does need official recognition. If I could play some role through my academic work in doing that, then that's why I did it really. So it was like there was something that was missing from, the criminal justice system that needed to be there.
Can I?
Yes, please, Ida.
We heard the term impact mentioned just then by John, and I think it's important for us to recognise that the impact is often felt more widely than just on the individual and their immediate family. So if you know that somebody who is a goth has been targeted in your area, if you are a goth too, you are going to feel unsafe in that area, even though the attack wasn't directly motivated at you. So the impact of hate crime against all different groups is that it affects everybody, not just that individual and their immediate family.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. Our discussion is about a recent decision by a UK police force to officially recognise attacks on goths as hate crimes. I'm joined by music critic Simon Price, editor of Louder Than War, John Robb, criminologist John Garland, Una Morris from Stop Hate UK, and Sylvia Lancaster, whose daughter was killed for the way she looked. As Sophie's mother, what does it feel like having sort of done all the interviews in the last week, and having her campaign right up there in the spotlight.
It was very special, and I hold my hands up. We didn't expect that at all, and you just think back, to when we first started, how massive that's been in the last 5.5 years.
It was just the wristband thing. I remember that because there's little Sophie wristbands.
Yeah.
And I remember selling them at gigs, and you see, then about a week later, you used to say, well, why someone's got that wristband on? And then I went to interview Adam Ant about 6 months later, and he had one on. I was thinking, where did he get one from? And then suddenly you could see the thing start to move out, that people are identifying with it, weren't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the wristband thing was a really fantastic kind of start of the campaign, because it became a little fashion item to wear, didn't it?
Yeah.
With a meaning, with a depth to it.
Yeah, and it's surprising.
Simon, you had one as well.
I bought one from your gig, but I think, and then I ordered some more from your website. That's another thing. I think the internet has been really important.
Oh, it's been amazing. Kate, I have to say, Kate, who's been with us from day one, she uses that social networking to perfection. It's been an amazing tool to use, and she's used it very, very well.
Simon, why do you think this campaign has struck a chord?
I think it's overdue, but it's a recognition that attacks on people for the way they dress are attacks on somebody for what they are, not for what they've done. And on that level, it's the same as any other kind of hate crime. It should be treated as such. I
think it's brilliant, the situation now, but obviously it's not going to resolve what goes on out there. But it gives people a space, just someone to turn to in those occasions, which I think is really, really important. It's not going to stop the hate crimes, but it'll make the people victims of hate crimes feel like they've got some support, and they're not really, really isolated. Quite often, you could be one or two kids in a remote town or in a city, even a remote part of a city, and you could feel very, very isolated. And that isolation can be very, very scary.
Finally, from you, John, what's next in terms of your research, and what will that sort of drip feed into policy?
That's the plan. We're going to carry on interviewing people. We were going to do a small pilot study of around 20, and we put a call out and found about 90 people come forward already. So we can try and interview all of those. And then, the actual point of all this is to change policy. And obviously, Sylvia's, through the foundation, is starting to do that already. And hopefully if we can feed into that and just provide that sort of that evidence base to show, yes, there really is a problem out there and it needs addressing properly through the criminal justice system.
I think there's been no danger of the fact that it has been highlighted in the last week that it is a problem, and it does need to be recognised in the criminal justice system. Finally, from you, Sylvia, what would your final words be, and maybe reflect a bit on what Sophie would think?
Well, I just think, this is just the start. We've just scratched the surface, and let's carry on and see just how far we can go with it. And as far as our Soph, I think she would go, Mum, get on with it. I really think she'd be proud of us.
That was Sylvia Lancaster there, founder of the Sophie Lancaster Foundation. And I'd like to thank all my other guests: music critic Simon Price, editor of Louder Than War John Robb, criminologist John Garland, and Una Morris from Stop Hate UK.